afraid? You should be.
Hey everyone, it is late at night and I am Norman. Fear. Tonight we're talking about the things that we fear. As watch nerds, there are things that we're afraid to do to our watches, or things that we're afraid will happen to our watches. So when I make videos about watch winders, there's always comments pointing out that they aren't great for watches. And I don't disagree. You don't put your watch on a winder and just leave it there. Automatic watches are designed to be wound by wearing them. So I usually try and point out that I use it sparingly. But it was actually a different video that inspired this one, because I was thinking about it and wondering how valid some of the fears that we have actually are. So let's go through my list. Fear number 1 is water resistance. When I was a kid, I had a lot of watches here and there. I didn't really think a ton about them, but if I had some money and found a cheap watch in a gas station or something, I bought it. And it didn't matter what kind of water resistance they had. I wore them in the water and didn't care. I just figured every watch was water resistant. And to a degree, being concerned about water resistance is a real thing. I actually owned a Citizen. I don't even recall what model it was, but I purchased it. It was a quartz piece, probably a dive style watch with 100 or 200 meters of water resistance at most. But the battery died, and I took it into the place where I bought it, a jewelry store, and they refused to change the battery. But I was confused, like I bought it here, why can't you change my battery? They said it was because they couldn't guarantee the water resistance, and I was still confused because I wasn't a watch nerd. I had no idea. Again, I just figured that watches were water resistant. So I insisted, and they did it, and I went and visited my mom. We hung out in the pool. And that watch died because it wasn't water resistant anymore. So yes, this is somewhat of a valid fear, although I think we kind of take it to extremes. I used to own an Armida that had 200 meters of water resistance, and that wasn't enough. I needed more for some reason. So I sold that and bought a dive watch that had 300 meters of water resistance. And now I own an Armida that also has 300 meters of water resistance. Ridiculous. Another one of our fears is the fear of wearing your watch in the shower or other hot water places like hot tubs, which I never ever do. Why would I? Granted, when I do, I keep my wrist out of the water. But back in the early days when I first became a watch nerd in earnest, my entire collection was dive watches, and I never, ever, ever took them off. I didn't take them off in the shower because they're dive watches. I am going to get those watches wet all the time. Also ridiculous. But none of those watches had any of their gaskets wear out. And I'm not sure I know anyone who's had that happen to them. However, I'm not going to rule this one out as not a legitimate fear, because it may very well shorten the lifespan of the gaskets in your watch. Just from expansion and contraction. With any of these fears, like this one, If this has happened to you, be sure to let us know about it in the comments. I would be really interested to hear your story. The next fear is overwinding. And in this one, I'm talking about manually wound watches. And this might be a fear that I alone have. But every time I wind up my manually wound watches, I am very nervous about inadvertently going beyond when it stops. So when the watch starts getting full, I am very cautious with it. I kind of hold the crown loosely so that my fingers can slip once it hits the end and stops turning. Yeah. I don't know if any of you have that fear, but I definitely do. I can just see myself breaking that crown, or the crown stem. The next fear is scratches or dings, especially for me with the crystal. A scratched crystal drives me nuts. Again, I remember early on, just before I started really collecting watches, I had a Citizen, different one, and knocked the crystal into the corner of a countertop, and it put a big scratch in it. I actually bought another of the same exact watch because I liked it so much, and that scratch just drove me crazy. With the case, not so much. I think on the second Citizen that I bought that was just like the other one, I was by the pool and had it sitting under a towel, and I picked up the towel and it fell onto the cement and put a ding in one of the lugs. That bugged me. But little scratches, not so much. And this is the one that inspired this video. So I did a short YouTube video wondering why G-Shocks don't come with sapphire crystals. And some of you pointed out, truthfully, that sapphire crystals will shatter because they're so hard. And that actually the toughest would probably be an acrylic, a thick acrylic crystal. But I don't disagree with that. But I wonder how many people have actually shattered a sapphire crystal. I know I haven't, and I wear watches every day, and I have lots of watches with sapphire crystals, and so far, knock on wood, not even close to shattering one. And I think, aren't some of the more expensive G-Shocks, don't they have sapphire crystals? I could be wrong. I'll have to look. But if you have shattered a sapphire crystal, I definitely want to know about it, because I would happily admit that I'm wrong in how afraid of that we are. The next fear I have on my list is having your watch fall off. Now, this is a valid fear depending on the watch, because it's almost happened to me. My first Smith's Everest had the old style friction fit clasp, and it wasn't great. It would pop open just by bending my wrist too far. So when I sent it in to have the inside of the crystal cleaned, there was a fleck in there. I had the watchmaker tighten up that clasp, and it helped a lot. It didn't pop open in regular use, so I thought it was fine. I jumped into the lake and the clasp popped open. Fortunately, it didn't fall off my wrist because I felt it happen and held my arm up the whole time I was in the water till I got back to shore. There's also the story of my wife's watch where the buckle on her swatch broke. Luckily, the keeper actually held it on her wrist, but if that had fallen off, who knows where that would have happened or if she would have noticed right away. And another fear that I have is a fear of components of our watch wearing out. And in this case, I'm talking about external ones, like screwed down crowns. That is another fear that I have, in part because the vintage Tudor was a case where I had to replace its threaded portion and crown because it had worn out. But that was a vintage watch. Still, whenever I'm unscrewing, and especially screwing in screwed down crowns, I am very careful when I begin threading that to just try and extend the life of those threads. And this also includes spring bars. I know that there are some people who can afford luxury watches and have lots of them. And I don't know them personally, but from YouTube. And anytime they change a bracelet, every single time, new spring bars. Every single time. I've encountered a few spring bars in watches that I've purchased on eBay that didn't look great. But other than that, I don't really ever change mine unless they look like they're wearing out. And so far, again, knock on wood, I haven't had any problems with spring bars. Those are hardy little things. But if you have horror stories involving spring bars, again, you can share that in the comments below. This one's kind of funny, the not fitting under the cuff. I think that this is more of a style thing than actually legitimately fitting under a cuff. And I absolutely don't disagree at all when we're talking about style, except that wear what you want. Like if you want to break the rules and wear a G-Shock with a suit, that's fine. But the idea of a watch legitimately not fitting under a sleeve is interesting, because how tight are your sleeves? I mean, I feel like even a G-Shock would slip under most of the sleeves that my shirts have. I mean, maybe not as smoothly as a thinner watch, but yeah. Again, I think this one is definitely more of making a statement about style. About dressy watches should be thinner. But yeah, if we took it literally, it's kind of funny. And the last one is not being able to micro adjust your bracelet. So I love on-the-fly micro adjustments. I think I've only had one watch that actually has that, but it's such a cool idea. You don't need any tools to micro adjust your watch. But is this a legitimate fear that we aren't going to be able to do that? Like we may be on vacation and can't do that? I think it is. Because I took some watches to Palm Springs, and when I went from the cold weather here to the desert, yeah, I had a couple watches that had bracelets, and I did not bring any tools, and yeah, I had to not wear those watches because they were choking off my wrist. So I generally wore those later in the evening during that trip. But yeah, it's kind of a thing, and I generally carry a tool with me when I go on vacation, just so that I can do that, just in case the weather gets extreme in either direction. I'm able to do that while I'm there. So there you have it, some interesting fears that we have. If you have others that I didn't bring up here, feel free to let me know in the comments and share any of your stories related to these. Thanks for watching.